Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Agronomy and Action Insight series. We're very excited for you to be back with us here this week to spend the next hour or so of your morning with Golden Harvest. Hopefully you have a warm cup of coffee, tea, or beverage of choice here this morning. I know it's a cold one out there, so hopefully you're all somewhere warm, able to listen to this engaging hour of agronomy. With that being said, today's topic is going to be from field to future, low carbon intensity crops. Jumping into today's topic, I want to introduce the two presenters that we have with us this morning. We have Liz Hunt, who's the head of sustainability at Syngenta. She's located out in Colorado. She's been with Syngenta going on 16 years now, so lots of experience in the space and in the ag industry. We also have Steve Knorr on with us this morning. He is one of our Golden Harvest Seed Advisors. He is located in North Dakota. Very excited to have him on today to talk through what he's doing for his farm and for his customer base there in North Dakota. So again, we're going to kind of jump into content here, but before we do that, we actually have a poll question for you this morning to try to gauge where we're at as an overarching group when it comes to this carbon intensity topic. So the question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with your carbon intensity score and what drives it? All right, we'll go ahead and end that and share the results here. So based on our crowd, we have a large spread of kind of knowledge level here. Liz and Steve, for your information there, which is great. I think after today, hopefully you learn some additional things around carbon intensity, your score, and how you can influence it here. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Liz to get us started here this morning.
Great. Thanks, Julia. Thanks for having me join the webinar this morning. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about low intensity crops and some of the drivers behind them. But before we get started, I want to just give a little bit of introduction to some of the low carbon intensity transportation fuels, some of the drivers, and then some comparisons as around some of the different markets and such that are out there. So just to give you guys a little bit of an introduction here. So when we're thinking about some of these low carbon intensity transportation fuels, we're looking at some of the benefits to them. And some of those are designed, they're to bring fewer emissions compared to traditional fossil fuels to different transportation markets. They allow us to use some renewable feedstocks, such as biofuels. So some of the products that we're familiar with already from the ag industry, and waste materials, such as used cooking oils. Some of the low carbon transportation fuels that we'll see coming to market, some we're already familiar with, like biofuels for biodiesel or ethanol blends. But looking at sustainable aviation fuel, some of that coming from ethanol, some of that coming from other sources as well, and as well as maritime shipping. So a lot of emissions come from all these different sectors of transportation. So looking for how can we reduce those emissions. And again, I think we're familiar with some of these, just between ethanol and biodiesel, hydrogen or other synthetic fuels. Anything that's non-fossil fuel based. So if we think about what are some of the drivers that are causing this transition to low carbon transportation fuels, some of these, they come from a range of different drivers. Some of those come from looking at climate change mitigation, so more awareness and urgency to reduce emissions within the transportation sector. And this is transportation is global, particularly if we think about maritime travel and air travel. So there's a lot of international and national level commitments for reducing carbon footprints. Government policies and incentives that are driving this. There's lots of, there have been some tax incentives, some subsidies, some loan guarantees, federal, state regulations as well. Technological advances. So as we get new methodologies and technologies, we're allowed to make more transportation fuels from low carbon inputs that will allow us to scale more quickly and more cost effectively. There's a lot of consumer demand and other stakeholders, such as shareholders, to some of these large shipping companies or airline companies, or other transportation industries that are driving some of these demands. We've had conversations or looking at electrification of transportation, and you can only go so far with that. I fly all the time, and I'm really not sure how I feel about an electric airplane at this point. Maybe we'll get there at some point, but looking for some of these other options for us. Cost competitiveness will come over time with scale. And we just see these global trends happening, particularly Europe has a lot of commitments around this, and other markets around the world. So I just want to make a couple of clarifications as we go a little bit further into the discussion. There's been a lot of discussions over the last several years around carbon markets, and then we hear carbon incentives and carbon intensity. So I just want to clarify kind of the differences between the two. So what we're talking around today is carbon intensity. There's potential incentives for reduced carbon intensity crops and low carbon fuels. And then we do have voluntary carbon markets that are not related to transportation or anything like that. So if we think about the low carbon intensity incentives, carbon intensity yield is a key driver for that, with the adoption of regenerative ag practices. I'm excited to have Steve Knorr on here today because he'll be able to give you some more insights on some opportunities there. More simplified calculations and data requirements typically, potentially more high value, potentially some incentives through tax incentives. We expect that existing practices would qualify, and we see this as an opportunity potentially for longer term incentives and longer term demand. When we think about voluntary carbon markets, these typically require some sort of carbon sequestration for removals. There are some opportunities for reductions as well. Potentially lower value. There's a lot of volatility to the pricing with carbon markets. So a lot of uncertainty there. Typically, they're fairly complicated and expensive verification processes. Generally, they require the addition of a new practice on farm, typically a longer term commitment of 10 years to 100 years in some cases. Payment comes after verification, and just in general, there's less certainty on the demand and long-term viability of carbon markets. So just to clarify between the two, when we're talking today, we're going to focus on the carbon intensity and potential from that. So when we think about some of the demand and what are some of the drivers of demand in the US for low carbon feedstocks, we've been looking a lot at sustainable aviation fuel and some of the opportunities there. And looking at the demand between 2030 and 2050, it grows an incredible amount. There's the US SAF Grand Challenge, which is a really great resource to look and see kind of what the expectations and what the potential growth is over time. But we can kind of think of this in maybe three kind of stages from kind of current, mid, and longer term. Right now, there are several states that have incentives. There's several, airlines that are looking at different incentives as well around sustainable aviation fuel. And then as we look with the Inflation Reduction Act, that included a federal level incentive called 45Z for low carbon transportation fuels. I will say that there's uncertainty currently with the new administration and any extension or implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and 45Z. So I'm watching the news every day, and I'm sure you guys are as well. We'll see more demand just coming just based by there have been several facilities that have already been funded from guaranteed loans from the Department of Energy. So we know that those are coming online between 26 and 27. So that will allow for some of that scale and some of that starting to bring the cost a little bit closer to that of fossil-based fuels. And then continuing 2030 to 2035 and beyond, there'll continue to be more demand for sustainable aviation fuel. And there'll be limited large production of non-crop alternatives. So it'll be a good opportunity potentially for some of the crops that you're currently growing. So what is carbon intensity and how do we calculate it? So it's fairly straightforward. There are models available to do this, but basically it just looks at the total CO2 emissions of crop production and divide that by the total crop yield. So you're looking at all of the emissions for the inputs divided by the output that you've got. When you think about the CO2 emissions, it does include things like the fertilizer type and volume, on-farm energy use, conservation practices, total pesticide applications as well. And then all of the emissions factors associated with each of those products and practices. When you think about an ethanol plant, for example, it's going to take into consideration, the carbon intensity for the crop production and for the actual manufacturing of that biofuel and put those together for a total carbon intensity for the production of that product. It does use the model developed by the Department of Energy called the GREET model. We love our acronyms in the sustainability world. So that's the Greenhouse Gases, Regulated Emissions, and Energy Use and Technologies model. And we're going to take a look at the latest version of that here in just a second. So about mid-January, there was a new version of the proposed GREET model. The USDA FDCIC version of the GREET model was released, and I've got a screenshot here for it. But just to kind of hit on this, it really takes a simplified approach for data production or data collection from what we see here. There were some previous guidelines for another tax incentive where practices needed to be bundled. It appears that we can unbundle practices as part of this model. It is under peer review and public comment now, but you can see some of the key drivers in the model are really looking at the type of regenerative ag practices that are being adopted on the farm. So that's things like cover crops, tillage practices, fertilizer application timing, and any enhanced fertilizer products that are being used, such as nitrogen nitrification inhibitors. And then it has emissions factors associated with those, looking at your location from a state and county level, and then doing the calculation in there. I will say, when I'm asked about what you can do to prepare for this, my biggest piece of advice is to get your data house in order. So making sure that you have strong records by field, and you're keeping those records. So when the opportunity does arise for things like low carbon intensity feedstocks, you'll be ready to meet any of those requirements, because there will be the use of the model for certain that is driven by the data on your farm. And there is most likely to be some type of audit and verification that comes along with this to receive any potential incentives. So before I turn it over to Steve to take you through this from really a great experiential learning on low carbon intensity fuels, just want to make sure we see kind of where the potential is from these practices that we just talked about. And a lot of these are dependent on location, soil type, and such. But you can see some of the key drivers here are the use of cover crops and the tillage, manure, nutrient management, and of course, driving yields as well. But for US crops to be competitive or being able to be used at with some of these global markets, particularly for aviation fuel, adopting one of these practices or where you've already been using one of these practices on your farm will help to meet some of those eligibility requirements. So looking forward to some of the questions at the end and happy to turn this over to Steve now.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everybody, obviously, on this morning. So my story is obviously I'm a Golden Harvest seed advisor. I became a seed advisor in 2017 and was selling seed. Obviously, I'm a fourth generation farmer, graduated from North Dakota State with a degree in crop and weed science. And my story has been of growing more bushels on my farm and finding a way to do that. And for years, I called myself a moron. I put more fertility on to grow a higher yield event. And after 25 years, I've kind of changed my position within the last 5 years. And obviously the story of regenerative ag or organic farming and conventional. And I thought, is there a space to fit? And so I started my journey about 5 years ago and obviously started looking at farming practices, started looking at the input side of how we manage our inputs and what we get out of those inputs. And at the end of the day, started to develop a program we call Ag Vision Max. And I'm going to here to share you about that today. But what was unique is we started looking at this carbon smart farming and carbon intensity. Really, things came in alignment for me with my dealership as far as bringing value to my customers in the sense of, hey, we've got proven methodology of how we can be a better farmer with less inputs and also right along with this opportunity that's on the forefront of carbon intensity or this voluntary carbon market opportunity. And so we're excited. We've been in front of this for the last year and a half on the carbon intensity, spending a lot of time talking and educating growers in our market area about what the opportunity looks like and what to do to get prepared. And as Liz said it's about preparing for the opportunity. Yes, some of these things, the guidance we're waiting from the government on 45Z is hopefully going to come to fruition for us. And we've got time right now because we don't hit the dirt for another month to make some farming changes or look at some farming practices that may bring an opportunity down road for us here in 2025. So we'll get into it here. So once again, Steve Knorr, Farmer's Choice, and I'm going to present carbon smart farming and carbon intensity here this morning. So once again, I am the co-owner and president CEO of a company that we named Farmer's Choice, started in 2018. And like I say, my ambition was to come into this egg sector and bring value to my friends, family, and neighbors. And at the end of the day, we've done that over the last 7 years and grown our book of business. And like I say, whether it's in regenerative type practices or products, we really do a good job of vetting things on our own farms before we go sell them to our friends, family, and neighbors. I want to quickly talk about really what the Ag Vision program, which is a scripted playbook that's executable by a grower. And I think sometimes the challenges for growers is, there's all these products in the marketplace, but what works, what doesn't, and the combination of them. At the end of the day, we wanted to bring a real easy playbook with practices that they were already doing, passes they were already making on the farm, and bring certain things to bear in those applications that would bring value in this carbon smart farming, which, like I say, in turn, is going to hopefully give you a better CI score. And objectively, in my 25 years, the years that I reduced my synthetic inputs, I had a negative event. I had a yield loss. And there's ways to mitigate that and be able to reduce your inputs without taking a yield loss and hopefully a yield gain. And that's been my journey for the last 5 years. Instead of using more, I could use less, use what was in my ground, balance that soil, bring carbon into it to achieve a higher yield event. So, but real quickly on this slide, it starts with our soil, and there's a chemical, biological, and physical component of that soil. And we're working with 3 pools: the total pool, that organic pool, that extractable pool, and the plant available pool. And how we move, how those nutrients cycle between those pools is important. And it really starts with the carbon story. And when we talk about carbon intensity, that's, like I say, voluntary carbon. It's about sequestering carbon. And at the end of the day, we want to add carbon in our soil. We need to build carbon because that's really the driving force of this nutrient cycling we see in our soils. Obviously, once again, I graduated, 25 years ago from NDSU, and what I was taught in academia was 2.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of wheat, 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn, and I think if you spend some time researching academia, we're seeing a lot more studies coming about how we're applying these nutrients to our soil and what we're actually getting out of them. And this is an interesting study out of University of Illinois about how much nitrogen the corn takes up. And what we're finding is a lot of it is organic nitrogen, 67% on average. And as a farmer, I'm spending a pile of money in these buckets. And fertility is one of the bigger buckets I spend in my past 25 years. But like I say, we see these studies come out. Only 21% of it made the green on an anhydrous application in the fall. Only 46% made it in as a applied UAN in a 2x3, and only 34% in a broadcast spread urea. So we really need to start looking at this, and is there a better way? And as we looked at that GREET model or the USDA model, they talk about the 4 R's or split application. We need to start looking at those type of opportunities and really capitalize on what's to come about with the carbon market opportunity. Once again, like I said, I look at this as an ag retailer, my dealership. Basically, there's of the farm dollar spend, we're spending 40% in chemistry. We're spending 40% of our farm dollar spend in fertility, 10% nutrition, and only 10% in seed. And I look at that fertilizer bucket, and like I say, there's a fine line there, guys. We don't want to cut fertility because in a low commodity year, every 10% loss in yield equates to about a 50% loss in farm profitability. So we need to be careful as we enter into that space and really understand our soils and what we can get out of our soils and what products we can use with applications to reduce that cost. And like I say, we really look at Ag Vision. Our program is actually a fertility reduction by using some products and using some applications and timing to implement a reduction in cost without causing a yield deficit. So what is this Ag Vision Max, and what's it all about, Steve? And like I say, we've been in this process for 4 years. We did 2 years of vetting in this scripted playbook with these products that we identified that would bring value, and we launched it here 2 years ago. And like I say, we've been the win success has been fantastic. I mean, it's fun to get to the end of the season. We do tissues and soils, and we pull the data, and we'll go through some of that here shortly. But what's fun for me as a seed advisor and also as an agriculture producer is to see text coming in from the com. I say, hey, this is the best crop we've ever grown. But going back to the overview, this is a carbon-based program. So bringing carbon into your soil with the different applications we're doing in season. And like I say, the goals of the program: reduce synthetic fertility. And as you saw on the slide from Liz, that's one of the components of basically reducing your CI score. We want to increase soil biology. We understand those 3 pools. The function of those 3 pools is the biology that's working in those pools to bring nutrient availability. We want to maintain a yield goal or gain yield, right? So if I can reduce fertility and maintain yield, guess what? I should have a better ROI. Yes, we want to have a gain yield and obviously lower that input cost. And like I say, obviously the bottom line for me as a farmer is the increased ROI. And today that can come from a program like an Ag Vision Max without a CI opportunity. Or guess what? I can capitalize on the increased ROI on the farm acre, but also capture this carbon intensity and the value proposition that could come down the road here from 45Z opportunity. So, all right, question is, let's see it, Steve. What are you seeing up there in North Dakota and eastern Montana? Here it is. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So we capture observations all season. Our agronomists are out kicking the tires. We're pulling plants, doing stand counts. All those things matter in season to show, is a product, is a program working? And as you can see here, this is an Ag Vision compared to a check, the traditional standard grower practice. We're a leaf ahead, better root structure. It's tough to see on the screen, but those are actually, we deploy these drones that actually we use software from Golden Harvest, and they can take a picture of the field, and we can count that stand in early season. The Ag Vision compared to the check was about a 1,500 plant stand difference. So think about that. Yield drivers, I need to have the stand out there to achieve max yield. And every time we delineate a plant out there, or lose a plant, guess what? We've taken the yield potential off. So it's important to get good stand establishment, especially for me in the upper Midwest. We don't have the temperatures. We don't have the days. We need to get that crop up and out of the ground. We need to get to maturity in early fall so we don't have harvestable issues. So observations, root system, biomass, nutrient deficiency, tiller, stock, all these things matter. Once again, an Ag Vision on the left, a check on the right, same planted field, better roots, better stock. We're up and out of the ground faster, and we're going for better crop at year end. Once again, obviously a side-by-side infield, a split between the planter here, like I say, healthier, darker looking plant, just like I say, health. And like I say, these practices, we're bringing carbon with synthetic inputs. So the 721-3 is a carbon-based starter fertilizer compared to our old 1034, which is a polyphosphate in high salt. So once again, stand loss, all those things matter. Once again, it starts with that root structure. We need to have that healthy root to be able to go down, grab that subsoil moisture, pull nutrients into that plant, and keep it going all season long. Stock diameter. We see this time and time again with our Ag Vision programs. It doesn't matter where we're in central North Dakota or eastern Montana, where we're running this program, we're getting better stock diameters, which is important for obviously xylem phloem and bringing nutrients into that plant and water. Obviously, a huge component, probably the number one driver for yield, is obviously capturing solar radiation, making photosynthesis, making sugar. And at the end of the day, we want bigger solar panels out in our fields. And how do we influence that? How do we get a bigger ear leaf? Like I say, if you can pick up a ½ inch or an inch on an ear leaf, that's just more sugar creation to drive yield at year end. So what do we see with Ag Vision Mac? We like to see drought resiliency. We have a lot of dryland acres in North Dakota. Obviously, we get dry July, August. We need to get through those periods and make grain. So it's important for drought resiliency, nutrient uptake, nutrient cycling, obviously that increased yield potential, and obviously disease reduction, which is an important part of making yield as well. Again, pictures here, check to treated, stock diameter. Obviously, the check ear to the treated ear. You can see it in the picture. One of the things we do at our agronomist carrier, we call them refractometers. We can actually measure a Brix level of leaf tissue. We're out in the fields all summer long, squeezing sap out of that leaf and looking at Brix. We know that's a huge driver in yield, but also in disease mitigation, insect mitigation, herbicide injury, feeding those microbials, the bugs, and obviously filling your grain, seed size. So we're measuring Brix, and how do we get higher Brix? It's a healthy plant. It's the things we do in Ag Vision to build carbon and like I say, build Brix in that plant to execute these things that are in the bullet points. Okay, so nutrient use efficiency. That, as I started this, obviously, how could I lower my inputs, the synthetic inputs, and grow a bigger crop? And it starts right there, NUE. Like I say, if we can bring a synthetic with a carbon, if we can use the 4 Rs, we can decrease that synthetic input and increase our yield component. And like I say, case in point, picture left to right, which is important for me in North Dakota. We don't have the days. I need to get that crop up in the ground and growing fast to make maturity at year end. Like I say, components here. Obviously, a lot of you guys have done this out in the field, the agronomists, pulling the sheath off and trying to shake the silk off. And once again, that's huge for me across the Corn Belt. How do I get to maturity and build sugar in that cob and grow test weight and yield? Like I say, it starts with that healthy rhizosphere. If I can pull a plant and it's hanging onto that soil, that's important. And time again, we see this with Ag Vision. Like I say, how do I bring carbon, Steve? We'll go through some of the steps in our program quickly here in the next couple slides. But it comes with bringing a carbon such as a sugar, such as a humic, such as a manure, obviously, and that helps the CI score. So at the end of the day, we bring a product called Boost into our spray passes, and this picture shows here basically injury. We know as we're growing crops out in the fields, we need to mitigate. All plants will bring in that herbicide or chemistry and metabolize it. We want to help that plant metabolize it, and we bring a carbon source called Boost into our spray program. So picture on the left, obviously this is the fun part for me when we get these pictures coming from combine saying, hey, we're vetting the Ag Vision beans, and I guarantee the best beans that the ground has ever seen. So those are the things that are exciting to me at year end and really drive my business in the egg sector. We talk about disease, and that's a big component for us all, whether it's soybeans, corn. How do we mitigate disease? And we call it competitive inclusion. The good bugs beating the bad bugs. And once again, as we build this regenerative egg program called Ag Vision, we're seeing this time and time again. So it's been fun to see, obviously, the reduction of disease. This is a picture of white mold. I fight white mold here in North Dakota under irrigation. And as you can kind of see it, maybe you can't see it so well on your computers, but more infestation of white mold on the check side than the treated side. Once again, getting that year-end event. This was taken in City, Montana here this last fall. You can see the Ag Vision, which is the check in the middle, or the treated in the middle, and the two checks on the right. Obviously, if I can grow a plant that's healthier and keep it greener and pushing sugar into that seed piece, I'm going to have a higher yield event. So excited to see things like this. So, okay, so observationally, hey, we can capture those things. We can check bricks. We can look at leaf tissue, ear stalk diameter, ear leaf diameter. But we really wanted to drive into how do we check this biologically and chemically, et cetera, on is there a difference that we're seeing, whether it be soil or tissues? And obviously, a lot of you folks are familiar with the Haney test. This is a biologic activity test. But as we can see here, soybeans, corn, obviously from the Ag Vision, that's the AV to the check, there's a difference, a significant difference there in biological activity. And if I can increase biological activity throughout the growing season, not just in the spring of the year, not the summer, but all the way into that late R stage, guess what? I'm going to make a healthier plant. I'm going to achieve a higher yield event year end. We call it water extract organic carbon. Really, it's a measurable now. Academia is kind of looking at this as far as WEOC, and it's a driver for me as far as really measuring soil health as well. So water extract organic carbon, that's the food source for the biology in the soil. So if we can measure that WEOC, we've got higher numbers. We've got more food for the bugs in our soil profile that are going to eventually help that mineralize and nutrient cycle back to that plant. So once again, big differences between the soybeans and corn from check to treated. We call this CSAT. That's a WEOC divided by our CEC. Once again, it's important for us to see a better number there as well. We call this plant available phosphorus. So most of us get a parts per million on an Olson or Bray or Malek. So at the end of the day, we look at a pH3A, which gives us plant available phosphorus. And once again, we're having a huge difference between check and treated. Obviously available P2O5, potassium H3A, big difference there. And then finally, we pull all these metrics in and we show a soil health score. So there's several other metrics we pull in. I didn't share all of them, but develop this soil health score between an AgVision type model and a check model. So at the end of the day, AgVision Max, we wanted to create an easy button for kind of a regenerative ag program. So lowering those synthetic inputs, bringing in carbon to the program, and then executing these bullet points, which is a lot. And we measure those observationally or through soil or tissue testing, and then obviously an ROI at year end. So quickly, here's kind of the program for corn. We're looking at things we're already doing on farm and just adding in a product. So obviously a spring pre-sprayer pass with biological, a seed treat, carbon-based liquid fertilizers, enzymes, adding carbon to the post-herbicide pass, and then bringing some carbon again at the end. So this is kind of a blanket recommendation. We can reduce 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen, 20 to 30 pounds of phosphorus, 30 to 40 pounds of K. That's using this program. If I were just to cut those minerals without doing a program like this, yes, I'm going to see a yield decline at year end, and we can't afford to do that. So here's a soybean program. Once again, we've been doing this for 2 years and had extreme success. Obviously, once again, it comes down to the ROI. That's important for us to measure that. As you can see here across these crops here, corn and soybeans and wheat, we had positive ROIs. So to wrap this thing up, obviously, Liz showcased what the opportunity looks like on this carbon market. What I wanted to bring was, hey, is there an opportunity to get to execute a regenerative ag program, carbon smart farming? And it is. We've proven it here in North Dakota. There's a lot of folks in the space that are doing this already. But at the end of the day, we wanted to create an easy button for our growers to hit the easy button and say, if I execute this, I can, this is potentially my outcome. And we're excited to be a part of this opportunity. Like I say, we're excited about 45Z. We really need to advocate for it. There is a comment period now. I would recommend all of us as growers to get on that, and obviously industry, and get on that and comment about, hey, this is the right direction. So thanks for the time, Julia. I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the time this morning along with yourself, Liz. I think we did a great job kind of laying out the industry and then ways that you can affect it potentially as a farmer yourself. So what we'll go ahead and do now is I will transition to the slide here with our sweepstake, and then we're going to open up Q&A. So get your questions for Steve entered into Q&A along with Liz. Really unique opportunity to have Steve on with us today. He himself is a farmer that's doing this, and then he's also an advisor to individuals in his geography, helping them achieve kind of similar return on investments, yield increases, and improvement of CI scores. So get those questions submitted for Steve. So we'll go ahead and get started with questions, and I'll leave this slide up. So Steve, the first question that has come in here this morning is, where do you get your soil samples tested? Maybe expand on how you do them. Are you doing those on customer fields that do AgVision, or how the soil sampling works?
Yeah, we use a lab in South Dakota, Agronomy 365. Like I say, the traditional soil tests that I've gotten over the last 20 years of my farming career, really looking at chemical extractions, we really wanted to look at, yes, the biological, the physical component of our soil. So we get a lot more data points, which I shared here, obviously the H23, the H3As, those pools that really drive decisions to help us make those recommendations on farm.
Great. Another question for you, Steve, that's in the chat currently is, are you no-till, strip-till? What is your tillage program, and what's your recommendation maybe from your dealership there as you're working with customers?
Yeah, obviously we have a lot of different methodologies here in North Dakota, Eastern Montana. So no-till, obviously coming back into a standing wheat stubble. I personally do, I'm a strip tiller, so banning that fertility, and then like I say, ultimately that helps your CI score. No-till or a minimum till such as strip till is going to help on a CI event for you. But highly recommend, a strip till opportunity to ban that fertility.
Awesome. Liz, we'll ask a question for you here. Outside of 45Z, I know there's some, it's not super stable there. What are maybe some other opportunities that might be coming around carbon intensity? Are there any that you can, I guess, predict from your seat? Obviously, it's not a set in stone market, but anything you could add there?
Yeah, there's a couple opportunities. Some of them may be dependent on what state you're in. So, for example, Minnesota and Illinois have different state level incentives for biofuel production or sustainable aviation fuel production and decarbonization of transportation fuels. So those are some opportunities. And then really thinking about 2027 and beyond is when some of these plants that have received federal guaranteed loans will be coming online and bringing some of that price parity to sustainable aviation fuel. And the reality is 2027 isn't very far from now. So we've got to start thinking about what we're doing now. Some of the things like Steve was sharing as well, I think are great opportunities to start considering. But I think that there is a future for this. 45Z would obviously help kickstart it, but the need will not go away.
Thanks for that clarity, Liz. Steve, we have two questions kind of around leaf and ear leaf here. So what is the range of ear leaf measurements you usually see? Is there any, from your perspective, any size correlations to yield in your history here?
Well, obviously the bigger leaf, I don't care what crop we're growing, obviously the opportunity to capture more solar radiation. So leaf size, as far as, yes, I believe is a direct correlation to a yield event. As far as the incremental size of leaf compared to a yield event, I couldn't answer that. That's be a great study for a university or and a agronomy in action plot summer. But nevertheless, I believe, yes, a huge driver. The function of a leaf is to create sugar through photosynthesis, and late season reproductive side is to move those sugars into that ear and grow bigger kernels.
Right. Another kind of leaf question here. For someone that's looking to do tissue sampling for the first time in corn, what advice do you have for someone that's looking to get into it but has never done any leaf tissue sampling?
Yeah, lots of videos out there. So understand what leaf you're taking at what stage. And at the end of the day, like I say, there's key critical points that corn's life cycle, 4 to 6 leaf, we're developing the rows around that 10 to 12, we're developing the length of the ear. So obviously it's timing those prior to really see if we have any deficiencies to help mitigate that in a foliar type nutritional, etc. So
Great. Thanks, Steve. Another question here. How quickly do you typically see significant changes to the soil health score and the WEOC score in your system? Is it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from your experience?
So we can see it after year 1. I can tell you this in our experience and my personal experience. I'm growing corn. My NUE this year was 0.52 pounds. We've got growers down to 0.23 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn produced and growing the best crops they've grown. I didn't share a slide today here, but actually we're seeing yield events go up with NUEs coming down. And at the end of the day, explain that to me, but go back to the original slide. 67% of our organic N is what's in the plant. So at the end of the day, it's not all about that synthetic, but I caution growers, and I would caution anyone that don't jump off the cliff. You can't reduce synthetic inputs and hopefully achieve a higher yield event without doing these things without building soil health. And it starts there.
One more question for you, Steve, then we'll give you a break and ask Liz one here. The question is, do you have any experience with biologicals? And I believe that's part of your playbook. So maybe speak to that, Steve, on what you're doing with biologicals as part of Ag Vision.
Yeah, it's important. It's a growing space, the biological biostimulant. I've got a slide. There's over 200 companies that are in this space. And at the end of the day, really understand the background of the company, how they started, how they evolved, but secondarily understand that biological component. What is in the jug? Is it a sporulating bacteria? Is it a non-sporulating bacteria? also understand your soil, your customers' conditions. Bugs need oxygen, they need a food source, they need temperature, and they need water. So at the end of the day, if you're limiting those things, it might not make sense to make that investment. So understand your dirt, your customer's dirt. If they've got a hard pan, hey, this may be something we want to hold off. There's different biologicals on the market. There's digesters, so breaking down that biomass that's left over, which is part of our playbook, and then also biologicals on seed. But really, there's a lot out there. I'm sure there's a lot of good ones, and there's probably a lot of bad ones. But at the end of the day, understand who you're buying from.
Thanks. Liz, we'll switch over to you for a second here. There's a question that was asked, does Enogen play into the carbon space at all if someone's growing Enogen corn through Golden Harvest / Syngenta?
Yeah, so there's different opportunities with Enogen. As far as reducing carbon intensity, there's still the practices and the yields and such, and how you need to work with that from production. But the opportunities for Enogen have expanded as we've moved that into being used in beef and dairy production. So would encourage folks to look. Enogen has launched its Feed Forward program, where we are actually quantifying those benefits from that feed efficiency that is gained in beef and dairy production. We have gone through the process of doing life cycle assessments, so we can say, what are the environmental benefits from, climate impact to land use, water use, and such. We've quantified those. We've put together a verification protocol, and we're able to work with different value chain partners to monetize some of those reductions in that beef and dairy supply chain. We do have a program that we've launched with McDonald's. Julia, we have the press release, if we send that out as a follow-up or something like that, or check out our Feed Forward website. But that is the best opportunity for Enogen in this carbon space.
Steve, another question for you. We have lots of questions in the chat here, so thank you everyone for submitting them. Have you tried sap sampling at all through your programs?
No, next evolution, yes, is looking at sap analysis. We currently are not doing sap analysis. We are, like I say, measuring bricks in season using refractometers, but we have not done a sap analysis.
Okay. Another question here for you, Steve, is what is the impact to CI scores using your program? So in terms of your customer base truly lowering their scores, I don't know if you have a statistic or an average rate that they're able to reduce that. Any, I guess, like broad statements or individual stories you want to talk about there?
Yeah, obviously we're working right now on the 45Z. There's the traditional or the old GREET model, and then obviously this new one from USDA. Like I said, I personally like the older GREET model to calculate, and that was basically calculations based on inputs. So using less synthetic inputs, nitrogen, obviously phosphorus, potassium, looking at the split applications, all those things drive the score down. As far as the Ag Vision, what we've seen as far as the old GREET methodology, we're looking about 10 points by doing the program we're looking at through an Ag Vision. Like I say, there's additional points for cover crop. There's additional points for, a no-till or minimum till or strip till. But as far as just the actual program Ag Vision, that 7 to 10 points is typically what we see.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Liz, I have another question for you. Someone put in the Q&A that there are many articles on this topic that are actually cautioning farmers to not do too much now, because a lot of the farm programs will only play for incremental method adoption. So can you offer any insights on that for the larger group here?
Yeah, and it looks like I can combine that with another question that was up there. Someone from Iowa soybean grower doing no-till and cover crops for 5 years. So this is where carbon intensity and carbon markets, and we can get into insets and offsets. I bet we could do a whole webinar on this, Julia. and some of the differences related to those. So what Steve and I have been talking about is this carbon intensity and the opportunity for carbon intensity scoring going into some of these different biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels. From the guidance that we have seen for those opportunities, there is not an additionality requirement. For some of the carbon markets, particularly for offsets, and offsets you can think of, those are generally used by companies who are not within the ag supply chain in any way. So food companies are not looking necessarily at offsets. Offsets would be folks like Microsoft, for example. And in some of those offset markets, they do have an additionality requirement that says you need to do something new in order for you to quantify those benefits. So what I like about the carbon intensity aspect of it is we're starting to get a spectrum of opportunities for farmers in this carbon space. So for folks who, want to continue adding things or just starting on their journey, maybe the carbon offset market may be a good opportunity for them, but there's still a place for all of the folks who have been, leading the charge with some of these practices from the beginning, with the opportunities that seem to be emerging from this carbon intensity calculation and reduction. So there's a whole spectrum kind of in this space. And I like that that's what's happening.
Yes, definitely gives more opportunities, right? Steve, I have a question for you. We've talked a lot around carbon intensity, finding out your score, the GREET model. That's all great. Now, what do I do with that, right? So I guess, Steve, yourself personally in your geography, what are you doing to engage with ethanol plants to connect your AI score into those channels?
Yeah, great question, Julia. So we're advocating here in North Dakota. So there's 3 ethanol plants in our market area. We're engaged with all 3 of them. They're aware of this opportunity. Yes, we don't have the guidance yet. The law enacted January 1 of 2025 for the 45Z, but nevertheless, we're still waiting from guidance from Treasury and USDA. Once that comes about, once that happens, obviously the key is for the ethanol biofuel companies to engage and get growers data. And what I recommend to growers is get your data ready to go. Don't give it up. Keep it ready to go, because that's the value proposition we have as growers. If we can share that data through a CI score or a biofeedstock report, that's going to bring us value. So 1, get your data ready to go. Look at your 2025 production practices. What can I do? What's my score today? We call that the default score. So what is my score today with my current grower standard practice? And then what would it be if I did some agronomic changes, such as a no-till or a cover crop, et cetera, or using a program like Ag Vision or reducing synthetic inputs? But understand that, so you're ready to go here for plant here in 2025, and then get your data prepared. And then obviously, when this thing comes about, be able to transact with your ethanol plant or your biofuel company that's in your market area. So have conversations. If you're not in a definitive area for a biofuel, go talk to the elevator. They may be transacting grain, and there's things still coming in guidance here. We don't know what it should shake out. We call it a book and claim process or a mass balance approach. Mass balance means the bushels have to get to the ethanol plant. A book and claim would be, guess what? I could sell a CI certificate or a biofeedstock report and not actually move the grain to those ethanol plants. So comment period's important here. I would recommend guys get on it, comment, understand first, and so you're advocating in the right direction, and then, like I said, get prepared and get ready for this thing.
Liz, we had a question come in to kind of bounce off your last statement there that says, if a new operator on a field that has been in regenerative ag in the past, are they allowed to kind of be reset for the new operator as far as carbon programs? So my assumption is like a new operator's coming to, take over that farm.
Yeah, so the carbon programs, as they are currently written, are tied to the field. So they'll often ask for historical information on that field. And so it would not reset with a new operator. That new operator would need to be able to know what was happening on those fields in previous years, to plug that into the models that are being used, and each market uses different models. So kind of that historical reference is anywhere from 3 to 20 years on that field. So it's with the field, not the operator.
Great. Last question for you, Steve, then we'll have, or Liz, then we'll have one more for Steve. Liz, the question is, what's the biggest difference between organic, regenerative, and carbon farming? And then just as a general statement, how important is it that we start shifting as an industry to those?
Yeah, so there isn't just one difference. So organic farming, some of it's market demand, right? So organic farming can be driven by market demand. Organic farming has, USDA regulations around it, or rules set that you need to follow for what is an organic operation. Regenerative farming looks at more of a holistic approach. It may take in some components from conventional farming, from organic farming, and put those together in kind of an outcomes-based approach. So looking at some of the things that we've been talking about, the tillage practices, keeping plants in the ground year round, crop rotations, looking at precision applications, things like that is regenerative farming. Carbon farming to me is an outcome, right? So from the regenerative practices, you may have a carbon benefit that's an outcome. And I look at that as more of the cherry on top from doing some of these practices. So lots of differences between them. I think that there is a huge opportunity for the agriculture community to start looking at some of these new technologies, some of the biologicals, some of the precision applications, some of that that Steve's been talking about. And I do think that that will be the transition going forward. As farmers, we want to make sure we're doing the best for the land that we have, so we have productivity long into the future. So looking at some of these new tools, practices, technologies that can help to enhance that long into the future, I think is really important for all of us in the agriculture community.
Awesome, Liz. Liz and Steve, we are at time, so I think I am going to go ahead and wrap. I appreciate both of you joining today. This is quite an interesting topic for most people, but also one that's complex, right? And it's hard to break down and know exactly what's going on. So I appreciate you both joining here today and giving your insights. Everyone that tuned in, appreciate you being here. If there's additional questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, and I can get those questions sent over to Steve and Liz and help connect you if there's interest there. So with that, I hope you all have a great Thursday. You stay warm and tune in next week to hear where does yield come from some other agronomy personnel. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.